There is a type of pain that almost no one notices. It's not the pain of the breakup itself. It's the suffering of having given everything and realizing over time that you gave it all to someone who never truly knew how to receive it, of having been there in the moments that mattered, of having invested sincerely and, despite it all, not being recognized for your true worth. If this resonates deeply with you, stay with me, because this video on relationship psychology isn't here to judge or blame you. It's here to give you back something you lost along the way. Because here, we're not going to talk about mistakes as if you were weak. We're going to explore something much deeper. What happens when a good, attentive, and committed man chooses to let go? What happens inside you when you realize that loving wasn't the problem, that giving wasn't the fault, that the only real misstep was staying longer than necessary? In this video, you're going to feel something different. You won't feel guilt. You won't feel shame for having loved authentically. You're going to feel clarity. You're going to understand why giving so much doesn't make you any less valuable. Quite the opposite. And above all, you're going to start feeling pride. Pride in the man you were and the man you're becoming now. The one who accepts letting go. Because letting go of someone who never truly deserved you isn't abandonment. It's an act of self-respect. It's the exact moment when you stop asking why you weren't valued and start realizing that your worth was never in question. It was simply in the wrong hands. Here, you're going to understand an essential truth. Offering love, time, presence, and loyalty wasn't a waste. It was a test. A test that not everyone is capable of passing. And when you see it that way, something realigns inside you. The pain starts turning into strength, disappointment into dignity, and loss into freedom. Before we continue, do this for yourself. Like this video if you've ever felt like you gave more than you received. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Because here on Relationship Psychology, we don't talk about resentment. We talk about self-esteem, clarity, and inner power. Share it so other men can benefit, and leave in the comments just one word, the one that marks this journey: free. Not because it didn't matter, not because it didn't hurt, but because today you're starting to realize that letting go wasn't losing. It was finding yourself again. And what comes next can completely transform how you see your story. Giving abundantly wasn't your mistake, and you need to hear it calmly, without judgment and without guilt. Because you didn't fail by loving. You failed by persisting where you weren't welcomed. There's a huge difference between loving with an open heart and staying in a place where that heart wears itself out in silence. You brought your presence when it was needed. You gave time, patience, support, even when it wasn't easy. And that doesn't make you naive or weak. It makes you a man capable of real commitment. The problem wasn't your devotion. The problem was believing the person opposite you had the same capacity to honor what you offered. That's where many men go wrong and punish themselves inside. They tell themselves they gave too much, exposed themselves too much, that they should have held back. No, what you should have done wasn't give less, but give it to someone who would appreciate it, because giving doesn't diminish your value. Staying where no one takes care of you, that's what did. When you start to grasp this, something frees itself inside you. You stop seeing yourself as the one who lost and start seeing yourself as the one who was authentic, who didn't play halfway, who didn't love with restraint. And that authenticity, even if it isn't always reciprocated, is one of the noblest forms of masculine dignity there is. She didn't know how to handle what you brought. She didn't know how to care for constancy, loyalty, emotional stability. Not because she was bad, but because she wasn't ready. And that doesn't tarnish who you are. On the contrary, it confirms it, because not everyone is up to a man who truly gives. Here, the inner narrative starts to shift. You no longer ask why it wasn't enough. You start to understand it wasn't about quantity, but emotional compatibility. And when that truth settles in, the weight lightens, the blame fades, and a quiet pride begins to emerge. Giving abundantly didn't weaken you. It revealed you. And now that you're letting go, you're not doing it out of anger, but with new clarity. You weren't going to shrink to fit. You were going to step back to feel whole again. And that, even if it hurts at first, is the first step towards something truly powerful. Living free without constantly justifying yourself. There's something you only understand when you look back honestly. Giving so much didn't empty you. It showed you who was really in front of you. Because when a man gives truly, without games or masks, the other person is exposed. Either they know how to care for what they receive, or they waste it. And that says nothing about you. It speaks to her capacity. You didn't love halfway. You weren't there only when it suited you. You didn't offer emotional crumbs. You were present even when it was hard. And that, even if it hurts to remember now, is a sign of value, not weakness. The issue is that not everyone knows how to receive something healthy. Some people only know how to thrive in lack, confusion, empty intensity. And when offered stability, they don't know what to do with it. That's where the male ego needs to reposition itself. You weren't too much. You were too much for someone who wasn't ready, and that distinction changes everything. It removes the guilt, pulls you out of the "if only I'd given less" loop, and gives you a far truer truth. You acted in alignment with who you are. She didn't reject your value. She simply couldn't carry it. She couldn't match the constancy, the presence, the emotional clarity. And that doesn't diminish you. On the contrary, it elevates you because not everyone can face an integrous man and rise to the occasion. Some prefer to let go rather than grow. This understanding is liberating because you start seeing the story differently. No longer as the man who lost someone, but as the man who discovered he didn't deserve to keep giving so much. And that discovery, though painful, is a form of protection. Here, something very important begins to settle inside you. Trust in yourself, trust in your way of loving, in your ability to give, in your judgment to know when to continue and when to release. Because the real misstep wasn't giving. The real misstep would have been continuing to give to someone who was already draining you. And now that you see clearly, something calms. You don't need to change who you are. You don't need to harden, you just need to better choose who gets access. And this quiet but profound learning is one of the purest ways to start living free. There comes a moment when you look at the story from a distance, when you understand something uncomfortable yet liberating. She couldn't care for what you offered. Not because she was bad, not because you weren't enough, but because not everyone is ready to walk alongside a man who loves with presence, constancy, and truth. You brought stability when she lived in doubt. You offered clarity when she moved in confusion, and that contrast, far from uniting, sometimes separates. Because receiving healthy love requires responsibility, consistency, willingness to grow. And not everyone wants that, even if they claim to. That's where your ego needs to reset, without rage, without empty pride. You weren't rejected because you gave too much. You were let go because what you offered required a version of her she wasn't ready to become. And that, though painful to accept, lifts an enormous weight, because it shows it wasn't about effort, but emotional maturity. When a man truly gives, the other is laid bare. Either they match the height, or they feel overwhelmed. And often, the overwhelmed one prefers to release before facing themselves, before admitting they're not up to someone who doesn't play, manipulate, or hide. This understanding completely changes how you see yourself. You no longer wonder what more you could have done. You start wondering why you kept giving when reciprocity was gone. And that question doesn't sink you, it awakens you, because it returns healthy responsibility, protecting your energy, your time, your way of loving. She couldn't support who you were, and that doesn't make you lesser. It confirms you as a man who didn't dilute himself to fit, who didn't shrink to be accepted, who offered what he had, and when he saw it wasn't valued, chose to leave. And that moment, though quiet, marks a before and after, because something new begins to be born in you. The certainty that your value doesn't need proving, only respecting. And from that respect, little by little, you start walking lighter, steadier, freer. There's a part of the story almost never named, but that you lived in silence. The where didn't happen on one specific day. It was cumulative. It was realizing it was always you supporting, understanding, waiting, yielding. And the more you gave, the less you received. Not because you weren't worth it, but because the balance had broken. That where didn't make you weak, it made you aware. Because there comes a moment when the body starts warning. Emotional fatigue, giving from a place that no longer refills, the intuition that even if you keep trying, nothing will change. And when that happens, continuing to give stops being love and starts being self-abandonment. You didn't leave from lack of feeling. You left because you understood loving can't mean losing yourself. Being present can't cost your peace. Supporting a relationship can't mean breaking inside. And that understanding doesn't come suddenly. It comes after truly trying, after betting, after enduring more than reason allowed. That's where many men judge themselves harshly. They say they should have left sooner, shouldn't have insisted so much, but that view is unfair. Only the one who truly gives learns where the limit is. Only the committed one discovers it, not by weakness, but by dignity. When you start seeing this clearly, something shifts in your self-esteem. You stop feeling shame for enduring. You start feeling respect for the man who could say enough, Because not everyone knows how to walk away without resentment. Not everyone can close without noise. Not everyone can choose their well-being without turning it into war. The where wasn't defeat, it was the warning. The warning that your energy deserved a better place. That your way of loving wasn't wrong, just poorly accompanied. And when you understand that, fatigue turns to learning, pain to clarity, and goodbye to a decision that returns your center. Letting go wasn't running, it was stopping the self-abandonment. And from there, with each step, you start feeling something you hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness, self-respect, and the deep calm of finally choosing yourself. That's the exact point where the weight drops and you start walking free. From here, something begins that isn't visible outside but changes everything inside. You start reclaiming your axis. You no longer wake up thinking about what failed. You no longer replay conversations. You no longer try to understand why it wasn't enough. Little by little, you return to yourself, and that return is quiet but profoundly powerful. Letting go doesn't mean it stopped mattering. It means you stopped sacrificing yourself, that you understood loving can't require breaking to sustain another. And when that internal click happens, something organizes, anxiety drops, the need to explain vanishes. The noise fades, not because it didn't hurt, but because you're no longer fighting reality. Here, the masculine ego begins to rise differently, not from arrogance, but from solidity. You start seeing yourself with new eyes, respecting the man who could love without reserve and still had the strength to withdraw when reciprocity was gone. That's not weakness, it's character. She may never fully understand what she lost. She might see it later. She might sense it in other men who won't measure up, but that no longer defines you. Because the most important thing isn't her understanding, it's that you already have. You understood your value didn't lie in what you endured, but in how much you respected yourself. At this stage, something truly liberating happens. You stop justifying your decision. You no longer need anyone to validate why you left. You no longer seek external approval. Inner calm is enough. Knowing you didn't betray yourself, didn't stay begging for affection, didn't break to fit. Letting go gave back something you'd gradually lost: quiet dignity, judgment, peace. And when a man recovers that, his way in the world changes. He moves differently, chooses differently, loves differently, no longer from lack, but from emotional abundance, from the certainty he doesn't need to prove himself to be enough. Here, a new stage begins. Not because someone new appears, but because you reappear in your own life. And when that happens, the past stops hurting like a wound and starts feeling like a lesson. A lesson that doesn't chain you, but finally leaves you free. At this point, something very revealing happens. You no longer look back with need, but with understanding. The story stops hurting like an open wound and starts being seen as a process that led you here. You no longer ask what you could have done differently for her to stay. You ask a far healthier question. Why did you stay when you no longer felt valued? That shift in perspective is key because that's where power returns to your hands. You understand you didn't lose a relationship. You gained discernment. You gained the ability to recognize when giving adds and when it subtracts. You gained the courage not to negotiate your dignity for fear of being alone. And that, even if no one celebrates it, is a huge victory. You start noticing your energy is no longer fragmented. It no longer goes to justifying, waiting, enduring. It's with you, in your body, your decisions, your way of looking at the future. And when energy returns home, the man feels different, more stable, more centered, more whole. She may follow her path. She may one day remember what you brought. She may compare. She may feel something never quite returned. But that weight is off you because you no longer need her to validate what you know. Your worth stopped depending on her gaze. Here the ego calms quietly. No rage, no blame. Just a firm sense of having done what was right, even if it hurt. Of leaving without destroying, without humiliating, without lowering yourself. Of closing the door with respect, even when it cost inside. Letting go of someone who never deserved you didn't make you cold. It made you clear. It gave you the ability to choose from calm rather than attachment, to love without losing yourself, to leave without hating. And that combination is rare, very rare. That's why it's so precious. That's the point where the past stops pulling, where what you gave no longer defines you, but what you learned does. And with that learning integrated, quietly, without hurry, you start moving forward with a feeling that no longer leaves you. Peace with yourself, knowing that in the end you didn't let go from weakness. You let go because you became strong, and from there, step by step, you keep moving forward free. Here, something very subtle but definitive happens. You stop idealizing what was. You no longer look back searching for signs of what could have been different. You no longer cling to memories to justify what you endured. You start seeing the full story without emotional filter, and that gives you a clarity you didn't have before. You realize you weren't asking for too much. You were asking for the basics: reciprocity, care, consistency. And when you understand that, something frees itself inside because you realize you weren't demanding. You were aware you didn't want more than you gave. You wanted balance, and there wasn't any. Here, the man's ego rises in a very clean way, not from wounded pride, but from clarity. You recognize yourself as someone who knew how to love well, who knew how to be there, who knew how to open up without playing, and above all, who knew how to withdraw without destroying, without humiliating, without clinging to what was no longer healthy. She may not have seen your value in time. She may have mistaken your constancy for something guaranteed. She may have thought you'd always be there, but that reading no longer weighs on you. Because now you know the one who doesn't care loses, and it's not your job to convince anyone of your worth. You start feeling a new calm, not euphoria, stability. The tranquility of not fighting reality, not waiting for someone to change, not negotiating with yourself. And that calm becomes a solid foundation from which you start rebuilding. Letting go at this stage doesn't hurt the same way. Because you're no longer letting go from the wound. You're letting go from understanding. Understanding that you gave what you had, that you didn't fail by loving, that not everyone can support someone integrous. And when you accept that without resentment, something very powerful happens. The past loses its grip on you. The story organizes, guilt disappears. And what remains isn't emptiness. What remains is space. Space to live without carrying what wasn't yours. Space to choose differently. Space to walk upright. Space, finally, to keep moving forward free. At this point, something very important happens inside you. You no longer need anything external to change to feel good inside. You're not waiting for apologies, explanations. You're not waiting to know if she'll ever understand what she lost, because something far more precious has already happened. You've reconciled with yourself. You start realizing letting go didn't leave you empty. It left you light. Light of expectations, light of unkept promises, light of the constant weight of proving your worth. And that lightness is felt in the body, the mind, the way you look at the future. You no longer carry a story that asked you to endure more than was fair. That's where many men feel a profound truth. You weren't rejected. You were redirected. Redirected toward a life where you don't have to beg for reciprocity, justify why you deserve attention, stay just to avoid guilt. You understand sometimes letting go isn't losing someone, it's saving yourself. She can follow her path, she may remember one day what you had, she may compare, she may feel something never quite came back. But that no longer defines you because your self-esteem stopped depending on her gaze. Your value became internal, and when that happens, power truly settles. You start noticing you choose differently, set boundaries without explaining, no longer settle for emotional crumbs, know how to withdraw in time. And that learning doesn't fade. It integrates, becomes character, judgment, a far more solid way of being in the world. Letting go of someone who never deserved you didn't make you cold. It made you aware of what you give, what you deserve, that your presence is a gift, not an obligation. And from that awareness, the past loses strength. Pain turns to experience, disappointment to clarity. You no longer look back with rage, you look back with gratitude for what was learned, and you move forward with firm certainty. What left took nothing from you. It gave you back to yourself. And when a man reaches that point, there's no going back. There's only the path ahead. Living upright, heart calm, with the deep feeling of finally being free. Here the circle closes. Not with applause, not with late messages, not with explanations you no longer need. It closes with a serene truth. Letting go of someone who never deserved you wasn't a loss. It was a decision of self-respect, a decision that returned your access when you'd placed everything outside. Today you can look back without shrinking, without shame for having given, without rage for not receiving. Because you understand something fundamental. Your way of loving wasn't the problem. The problem was staying longer than necessary where there was no reciprocity. And when you accept that, guilt falls away on its own. The weight disappears. Dignity returns to its place. She may not have known how to value what she had, She may have confused your constancy with something guaranteed. She may have thought you'd always be there. But that no longer defines you because you've learned the most important thing. Not everyone deserves access to your devotion, and that learning will accompany you from now on in every choice, every boundary, every relationship that will be up to it. Keep this conclusion engraved deep inside because it sums up the whole process. She lost something precious, but you gained the most important thing, yourself. Before leaving, do this gesture for yourself. Like the video if today you understand letting go was the strongest act you've done. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Because here we don't talk about resentment, we talk about self-esteem and masculine clarity. And leave in the comments one word, free. Not as escape, not as coldness, but as proof that after giving everything, you chose yourself. Keep moving forward calmly, upright, with the quiet certainty of the man who no longer stays where he isn't deserved. Because the man who lets go out of self-respect loses nothing. He frees himself.